This meeting is being recorded.
So, hello everyone and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to the May 2019 episode of ShapingEDU Live. My name is Samantha Becker, and I'm coming to you from the University Technology Office at Arizona State University. And unlike the movie Her would have you believe, this Samantha is not, in fact, artificial intelligence. Plus, I'm more of a Blade Runner gal anyway. So, ladies, gentlemen, and bots, as you know, today's episode is focused on artificial intelligence. While the term AI was coined in the 1950s at a small workshop held at Dartmouth College, it has really become popularized in recent history. The current and potential applications in education appear to be limitless. That's why we're all here. Chatbots that advise and supplement human instruction, truly adaptive technologies that learn about the student over time and serve up more tailored content and approaches, software that literally writes new stories based on a small amount of plot and character details, and of course, virtual assistants that are with us for our entire lives, sending us reminders, boosting our productivity, and helping us wind down. Today, calling someone an AI expert feels, in hindsight, like calling someone a social media expert in 2009. We know we're on the cusp of something big for certain, but it's challenging to predict the full breadth of the networks, devices, software, applications, and beyond that will proliferate over the next decade and then some. Not even the most advanced AI could predict how it's all going to play out. I thought this would be a useful exercise since AI is in the news a lot. I've just shared my screen here. From a number of current readings on AI, I've generated a word cloud in the shape of Pac-Man, just for fun. So you could see a sort of media-produced heat map in terms of what the international conversation is focused on when it comes to AI. What strikes me is how focused on humans so many AI conversations, initiatives, and projects are today. This past month on the West Coast, we saw the launch of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. We saw the applause around the human-centered component, and then we also saw some backlash about the lack of involvement of women and people of color. So here in this word cloud, we see some of that reflected. People, women, girls are some of the biggest words there in the cloud. Like many discussions about technology, there has been research about a gender gap in AI-focused learning experiences. So we know not only do we need to be concerned about these biases in terms of teaching and learning about AI, but also the biases that AI itself produces and exacerbates. So when we unleash technology that literally learns from its environments, it exacerbates the biases baked into those environments. So here today to talk about these very real challenges, and of course the diversity of opportunities, is a distinguished panel of AI enthusiasts. But before we meet our panelists, a few logistical notes. While the Zoom chat is available for free-flowing conversation, and I hope that you take great advantage of that, we also encourage you to tweet along with hashtag ShapingEDU. As a practical matter, I'll ask everyone in the audience to keep themselves muted unless speaking, and that's to eliminate any ambient noises and stray noises, which I could even hear some of in the background. So if I mute you, it's only out of love. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand. There's a raise your hand feature, or ask your question in the chat. Our wonderful and talented graphic facilitator, Karina Branson of ConverSketch, is joining us today. So she'll be live sketching this conversation. And we'll give her just a second to share her screen so you could view her work in progress. So she's gonna get that pulled up. Right now, it's time to dive in and meet our panelists. I'm joined today by several panelists who have great perspective to share ideas for taking AI to the next level in education and the obstacles we must surmount along the way. Several of them also have various examples and readings they'll be sharing, and we'll be sharing them in the chat. And so I'm gonna ask each of you to introduce yourselves right now. Mariano, we'll begin with you.
All right, well, good afternoon, I guess applies to most people right now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariano Loza-Coll, and I am an assistant professor of biology at California State University in Northridge in Los Angeles. And I'm so glad that you introduced us or introduced this community as AI enthusiasts, because I don't consider myself an AI expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I am very excited as an educator to explore various uses of AI. And what we're trying to do here at CSUN is part of a broader effort to try and look into innovative ways of using AI, both in education, but also in research and administration. So what I hope I can do today is share what we've done so far and some of the conversations we've had, and perhaps answer any questions that you may have, or discuss any ideas that you may have.
Mariano, we are so happy that you've joined us today from California. Thank you so much. And I'd like to pass it over to you, Debra, to share who you are and what your connection to AI is.
Okay, well, I'm Debra Cook. I'm an instructional designer with Western Governors University, and I agree with Mariano and Samantha that we are all enthusiasts here. I am really excited about AI and anticipate a tidal wave of change in higher education. Andrew Ning recently commented, he paraphrased, that AI is the next electricity. So I think we can just see and expect a wide-reaching change. I hope to share some resources today and some personal perspectives on how I think it's going to begin to impact, especially online learning.
I love the electricity analogy. Thank you for giving us that gold, Debra. Lindsay, who are you and what's your connection to AI? Oh,
can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you now.
Great. Yeah, I'm here from Portland, Oregon. I work as a solution engineer for Salesforce.org, which is a software company based out of San Francisco, and we specialize in really helping all kinds of organizations achieve their missions and their goals. And as a company, we've invested heavily in the last few years into artificial intelligence, and we labeled it Einstein. So we have a lot of Salesforce and Einstein that essentially encompasses our AI strategy. And so my role as a solution engineer is to help higher ed, community college, and K-12 organizations navigate how to leverage our platform, and especially I specialize in our Einstein artificial intelligence tools to help the organizations help their students and their other constituents. So also really excited to be here. I'm really excited to see how this conversation is picking up in the education space, and I think there's a lot of great potential that can be achieved for schools with technology. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us today. And one of the things I love about the ShapingEDU community is the mix of people we have. We have faculty, we have technology leaders, we have people coming from business, and it's just wonderful to get sort of this diversity of engagement because the technology itself begs and needs this diversity of engagement. So thank you so much. John, over to you, holding down the fort at UTO.
Hi, Sam, and thanks everyone for having me here today. You know, it's interesting, we clearly are enthusiasts, because I think when you talk about being an expert, it's like calling yourself maybe a futurist. You can't really call yourself a futurist if someone else called you that. So I like the fact that we're enthusiasts, and we're still really in early days around AI. And so I'm the deputy CIO at ASU and lead the analytics and reporting team. And it only makes sense that as we start growing our capabilities, that I think AI is all about the data. And as we start looking at machine learning and what we can do, data is really an integral part of that. And so I'm clearly an AI enthusiast. I'm also a voice enthusiast. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here, of how voice sort of fits into this AI world. But thanks for having me, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks so much for being on, John. Much appreciated. And last but certainly not least, Nancy, over to you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Rubin. I am the Dean of Continuing and Distance Education at Northwestern Health Sciences University in Bloomington, Minnesota. And I also have the honor of being the mayor of the Artificial Intelligence neighborhood for ShapingEDU. So I help keep the conversation going all the time. So I encourage you to, this isn't the only or the last place we can have these conversations. Please join the community, and we continue to talk about these things all the time.
Yes, Nancy, thank you so much for the plug. We do have a community. It is online, and it is via Slack. I know many of you here are already engaged in our Slack workspace and our Slack community. That's wonderful. For those of you who aren't and are interested in doing so, ShapingEDU.asu.edu is where you could actually apply to join our Slack workspace, and it is free. So thank you so much, Nancy. We're so pleased that you've joined us today. So on to the meat and potatoes of our program, or our eggplant parmesan if you are a vegetarian. We are going to get into some questions for the panelists. And as I pointed out at the beginning, if you have a question that's not being asked, feel free to raise your hand or state it in the chat, and we'll most definitely try to get to it. So Nancy, I'm going to stick with you for a hot minute.
Sure.
I know there might be some questions in the audience. At least I always could use a refresher. When we talk about AI, the term machine learning comes up a lot. And machine learning is a very important facet of these conversations. Could you distinguish for us the difference between AI and machine learning?
Sure, and I'm actually going to take it like a step back even further. So like we started to see the emergence or the increased adoption of cloud computing and faster computing and more storage, and we had more data. And like we heard, artificial intelligence is the new electricity. A lot of people say data is the new oil. So we have a lot of data, we have big data, and then we had, what do we do with this stuff? And that's where we started to see the emergence of artificial intelligence. So AI is really the output, whereas big data is the input. We have a lot of data, and we want to do something with it. And what comes out of it is, so AI is really, so big data is about gaining insight. AI is about decision making. And so you can think of it really in concentric circles. You have AI as the big circle, and machine learning is one of the tools that we use to wrangle big data. And then a subset of that, you hear about deep learning, neural networks, and I'll share some resources in the chat. We just don't have enough time to get into all of it. But all of these things, I think you probably heard all of these terms, and they're all part of the same field. The field is AI, and machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, natural language processing are really the tools that we use in the AI field.
Thank you so much for spelling it out for us. I definitely feel more clear, so I really appreciate that. Mariano, just so we can get more of a concrete idea of how AI is being leveraged, I'd love to get a little sense of how you're using it in your own environment at California State University, Northridge.
So I guess that it's probably fair to say that we're trying to take an all-of-the-above approach. We are approaching AI from a big data perspective, mostly as it applies to administration, handling student information, and in advising and being able to help our students navigate curriculum and career options as they move through their college education. But we're also taking a step back and taking a much deeper look at what it means to learn as humans, because let's not forget that machine learning will have to be coded by humans. So we've sort of started thinking about AI really as an excuse to start thinking much more deeply about what HI looks like and how human learning works, because we feel that before we can really teach machines to learn the way we learn much more complex topics and subjects, we need to take a much more careful look about how we learn those same things before we can even code it and put it into ones and zeros. So I guess that we're taking a sort of a two, if not multi-pronged approach to the problem, and we are trying to maintain a balance between what is available and exists right now, but also keeping an open eye and an open mind for what might come down the road.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mariano. John, I'd love to hear what's going on when it comes to AI, or at least the makings of AI at ASU.
Yes, of course, I'm voice biased, so I think I'll start with voice first. But we're doing a lot around voice enablement of building out a skill for our students, so students can go and ask questions. And we're also getting a lot of interest from faculty and staff, and also from the president and provost's office. How do we build smart tutors or voice tutors into our classrooms? And I think that's, as I said earlier, it's still early days around this technology, but clearly we have the data of our students, working in the LMS environments. We have their experience of the questions that they're asking and this wealth of data. We think there's this opportunity yet to do more around voice. And I think voice is a nice early entrance into the AI world, because when we think about AI, I think about the Jetsons and Jarvis, the two J's. And that's really the first time I think about voice. I think about those two and the intelligence behind the Jetsons house, or whether I'm watching a Tony Stark movie. And so I think we're a lot around voice, but we're also, I think we're looking at where chatbots fit in, as well as, how do we make our mobile app a lot smarter in terms of, in fact, we hired our first machine learning staff member who is focusing just on that data of how do I make notifications much more, how do I do notifications much better in this environment right there? So as Mariano is doing, we're kind of taking this multi-pronged approach of, first of all, just trying to understand what is AI, and is this AI, is it machine learning? But it really is focusing on how do we make the student experience better? How do we make sure that students are learning? And so I think if you have that as your goal in mind, it doesn't really matter the path you take to get to it, whether it's ML, AI, or whatever technology we decide to use.
Thank you so much for sharing, John. And Debra, I'd like to ask of you, even hypothetically or aspirationally, how do you believe, or how do you see that AI could be leveraged to really deepen not only learning, but advising too?
Thanks, Sam. There's a lot of applications, and I think the first place I want to start is by saying, as educators, designers, technology folks, I think we have an ethical imperative to really help our students begin to get into this technology, not only by participating it as it starts emerging in their courses, but also teaching them how to navigate, how to kind of befriend these learning objects, because they're going to encounter them in their job spaces in the future. So that's something that's always on my mind as I'm designing. In terms of applications, there are so many. Background analytics, for instance, in courses where we can learn how students are engaging with the course, where needed remediation may be for testing. We can find out where students are struggling and then develop thoughtful nudges to help them get back on track. I know that Laura is going to put some resources that I have put together in the chat for you, but Boost is one of those nudging resources that Canvas is now using. So you can take a look at that. But also with personalized and adaptive learning, that's becoming a very big thing, and AI is central to helping to actually create a learning path that is unique to the student. It can also help to harness the student's native curiosity. In other words, AI could present some ideas, and then the student can choose one of those ideas and go down a whole new path that they didn't anticipate before, which I think is really exciting. The student begins to own their learning, begins to own the content, and curate their particular portfolio of resources for their learning path. Again, another area is soft skill development. Immersion is a very interesting immersive environment where people can practice soft skills in the job setting, or can prepare to be in a job setting and learn how to handle difficult conversations and the like. And then finally, there are some applications where you can assess students on their 21st century skills before they enter the job market, maybe right before graduation, determine how they're doing with critical thinking and empathy and all those things that make them a well-rounded employee.
Thanks so much for sharing those examples, Debra. That's super, super helpful. You mentioned the term rabbit hole, and I'm gonna pull on that for a second, because I think a rabbit hole could be really fun and exciting, but it could also be really dangerous. So Lindsay, my question to you is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see related to AI that need solving?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of them have already been brought up in the time on this this call. But I think one for sure is definitely trust, right? Just as earlier you mentioned, right, there was an announcement, right, of a great accomplishment as far as AI, and then there was a group that maybe was a little nervous or a lack of trusting, which makes sense, right? It seems kind of big and scary, and it's easy to not trust something that's hard to understand, right? Especially when you get into the more complex types of AI. It's hard for the individual on the street to really understand, how did it do that? How did it work? So I think that's something that definitely has to be taken seriously and has to kind of come with time and ease. and also to even government oversight, right? Government is largely behind, right, in technology, especially when it comes to AI. So I think that's another area as far as legislation that can help build that trust with communities. I think kind of to add on to that, another issue I think is also the kind of the ethics in AI, right? So humans are writing all this AI, and it's hard to even understand how often subconscious or bias that exists in society can then just be further enhanced, right? AI isn't going to necessarily ignore that because it is created by the community. So I think kind of building ethical standards, best practices, really making that a continued dialogue and conversation is going to be critical as AI continues to proliferate in different scenarios in day-to-day life. And then I think kind of one of the final challenges is also just the people power, right? So it's great that we're all here today. We're all really passionate about this in the education space. But I definitely know that there's definitely a bigger demand for people with AI skills that understand these really complex technologies than the supply. So hopefully, I know there's been a big growth. A lot of institutions, right, have hired as well, developing programs to help scale up the future workforce for this challenge. But I think that's another one too, is having the people to bring this to the forefront.
Thank you for sharing. And that is a really great segue, because there are, like you said, issues of ethics, bias, and also majorly equity. And so Nancy, I'd like to throw it over to you just to kind of piggyback off what Lindsay said and other kind of implications and food for thought around equity, access, and bias.
So, I always take into account like the student perspective. So I think it's really important that we include them and inform them because AI is being built into all of the systems that we use on campus, and it may not be apparent to them. So the learning management system, it's being built in there, and your remote proctoring system, they're already using it there, your chat bots. And I think, again, what we're talking about is, transparency and inclusion. So both in decision-making and the ability to understand how it's their data, ownership of data. There's so many, ownership of data, the right to forget data. And I think actually Europe is farther ahead in a lot of the thinking and regulation around these things. So it's interesting to watch that space ahead of what happens here. What was really interesting, I think last week, a few lawmakers introduced the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which will require companies to study and fix flawed computer algorithms that result in inaccurate, unfair, biased, or discriminatory decisions. So you can see, I think it's, Mariano said it's, we're using machines, but they're, humans program a lot of this stuff, and there are biases in data sets. And all of these things have to be understood before we allow machines to completely, to make all the decisions for us. And I think we're in a really interesting time because a lot of this is emerging right now. But I think as educators and administrators, we have a responsibility to understand the power of these tools and make sure that they're being used properly.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nancy. Mariano, how are some of these challenges materializing in the classroom, and how might we think about mitigating them?
So I'd say that one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now, let me give you a little backdrop. So one of the projects that we started experimenting with here at CSUN is put together a chatbot that might help students during those off times that they may be engaging with the material. So outside of office hours, they need some help, they need some support from the instructor, and they can get to it. So what we've been thinking about is a chatbot that might allow them to engage with the material in a way that it's bound within the context of a course, right? And we immediately realized that one of the biggest challenges that we faced in thinking about such a chatbot was the fact that it's not so much what a machine can learn of the subject matter, in this case, and just as an example, some topic about molecular biology, but it's also really having that very human capacity to dissect what misconceptions there may be in a student question. So when we hear a question from a student, half the battle is really determining what is conceptually correct in the way that they formulated the question, and what may be a little misled. And that is something that currently machines can't really do until we come up with a way to code that into their capacity. So one of the biggest challenges that we face is not so much, aside from all philosophical discussions about machines taking over the world, one of the biggest challenges we face is how can we make sure that machines don't get it wrong and that don't do more harm than good, even within the very confined limits of what we're trying to do here. So it's not so much about an ill intent or machines getting out of control. It's knowing that we may get it wrong from the beginning, and that these things will tend to amplify rather than correct themselves.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Really, really important points. John, I'd sort of like to ask you the same question around kind of defining some of the biggest challenges we need to solve.
Well, so I think if we put aside some of the privacy and security challenges, I think that on the bright side, I think the entry into trying to understand AI and machine learning, that barrier is less and less. I think with some of the cloud technologies available today, the ability to do more, much more quickly, I think that time is lessening, and that's sort of exciting. Even though I know there are a ton of challenges, I like to look at the side of what's sort of the bright side of AI, and I think that there's whole new marketplaces out there, and when we look at students and what's going to be available for them in the future, I think huge opportunities around the ML AI space. And for the first time, I'm actually seeing voice positions opening up sort of across the U.S. Looking for voice programmers, and I would have never thought that would be a day where that would happen out there as well. So I think that clearly a lot of the challenges are really around the privacy and ethics around it. But I say 3 or 4 years ago when Nancy talked about some of the ability of cloud and compute now, that ability for us to do more and more is that barrier is lessening. So I'm really excited about the future there. So I took a little spin of your question, Sam, to the challenges to really more what's the opportunity out there.
I think that's a great spin. As we look at every single challenge, with that challenge comes an opportunity. And I actually am seeing in the chat a wonderful conversation emerge in back channel form about such opportunities and about such challenges. And so I really appreciate these are awesome observations. Audience, feel free to insert some questions as well. But since we're talking about the need for voice programmers, and we're talking about the integration of voice technology, I'd like to stick with you, John, for a second and just ask about emerging ways and tools for incorporating AI that may be out there right now.
Well, it's interesting. I think that, again, I say this a lot, it's early days. We're seeing a lot of companies who are approaching us and saying, help us build out the next smart tutor. And what I'm seeing is that it's still really complicated. I think the compute's there, but just sort of understanding the technology that needs to happen is there. I think one of the bigger challenges we're finding out is how do you share information across modalities? So whatever I build in the classroom, does it translate into chatbots? Does it translate into voice delivery? Does it translate into mobile or web delivery? I think that's one of the biggest challenges of how do I take this corpus of information that I have and share it in the multiple modalities. I think when I look about the challenges we're having right now, there's a lot of rework being done across the different delivery platforms. And I think if someone starts solving that, that would make our lives a lot easier.
Fantastic. Thanks for laying that out for us. And for those of you who want to volunteer to start solving some of these challenges, or at least talking about how to solve them, again, we have this great Slack workspace, and we have a channel specifically for artificial intelligence that currently about 170 education changemakers from across the globe, from universities, colleges, businesses, are in. So we'd love to see you there. Learn more at ShapingEDU.asu.edu. Debra, I would like to ask you the same questions about emerging ways and tools for incorporating AI, because I'm sure you have a couple ideas as well.
Oh my goodness, there's a lot of emerging tools beginning to develop, and it's really exciting. And our friend Laura is going to help me get them into the chat because I have a long list here. But as it's been mentioned, we have bots and tutors developing both as pop-ups within a course or kind of as a student logs into an LMS. Sophisticated, very sophisticated, immersive and blended reality environments are emerging. I know in my own work, we have an immersive experience for community health nurses to gain experience as though they were in an actual small town. And this is helpful because they're often in rural areas. One of my colleagues mentioned an interesting application that could be developed for facial recognition for students that are online to kind of register that aha moment when learning occurs. And then somehow that information can be taken as kind of a high point or a turning point in that person's learning for that particular course. I'm interested in a very sophisticated analysis of course effectiveness, of using the background analytics to actually find things within course effectiveness that we may not even know exist, so that we can continue to innovate and improve courses and improve learning. And then finally, I know Laura's going to put a lot of the resources I've collected in the chat, but there's an interesting article by a Dr. Calms from Squirrel AI Learning, in which he has actually done some work in China with AI and has actually developed machine learning that increases learning efficiency by 5 times. So in China, they've done an experiment where they've actually replaced teachers, and they've increased learning effectiveness by 5 times. And so Laura can get that link to that article there so you can read more about it. But I think the applications are just beginning. I can envision really creative dashboards being developed for students to log in, especially if they're online students, to have a very personalized kind of a day set up for them with all kinds of places where they can do a personal journal. They could find out exactly where they left off in the course material. They could pick up a conversation that's happening with an instructor or another student, jump into the discussion board, find out what's happening in very easy ways. I think it's really exciting.
It is exciting. Thank you so much for sharing, Debra. And as we look at applications of AI in education, certainly it's always helpful to look to the consumer sector and other sectors that have been maybe leveraging AI experimentally or for even longer, and not without some controversy either. So I'm thinking about an article or a project I read about several years ago in the medical field, in the health profession, actually creating facial recognition AI that not only can detect sentiments based on very, very discrete, the very discrete nuances of facial cues, but actually distinguish and diagnose different forms of depression based on how the person was interacting, or even based on their facial expressions. And so here I am thinking, like, wow, this is phenomenal, the ability to diagnose someone just like that, of course, so that they can get the proper help and treatment. But what about applying something like that to an online course, or a course where there's a massive amount of learners? Not to say that the instructor would be supplemented, and certainly a tons of ethical and privacy implications, but just putting the question out there, what would it mean to actually analyze deeply the sentiments of students, both holistically across your course and individually, and get some sort of not just score in terms of how people are grasping the material, but what's their sentiment? Are they bored? Are they confused? It's really interesting, the type of heat map that such AI could help not only generate but respond to in the moment. Of course, not without controversy and understanding how you would opt in, or how and making sure there's that human component. But certainly interesting to think about for future applications. Lindsay, I would love to turn it over to you and ask you about some of the approaches and some of the advancements that you're most excited about.
Sure. Yeah. And of course, since my role being at Salesforce, the examples I have are related to our platform, but they're definitely categorically apply, I think, across a broad number of technologies. So at Salesforce, we kind of categorize our approach to AI in terms of application into 4 categories. So the first one is like prediction. So using machine learning, using big data to help predict outcomes. And so one that I know a few I've discussed with different educational institutions, but one is even just like predicting the success of a student and their likelihood to complete their program. But then even below that, the kind of second category, which is discovering. So being able to predict, but then also look deeper and to figure out, understanding why did that prediction turn out the way it did. And maybe seeing, are there some insights from those models to understand what are the factors in your data that are influencing their likelihood to succeed or not. And so being able to discover more of the patterns in your data is something else that I think AI can definitely help with. Another one is, I think we've heard a bit about recommending. So even having maybe personalized engagement. So again, at Salesforce, we have a number of ways to communicate with students. So say some students like texting, some prefer phone calls, some prefer email. And so being able to use machine learning again to be able to identify, is this individual most likely to engage with a text or with a different channel? And so being able to create more personal experiences that are unique to different individuals is another great application. And also things like just recommending, hey, we think you should take this course, or we should think you would like to read this article, something like that. And then another piece, which I love, I think voice can be part of this as well, is automating. So something that we're currently developing at Salesforce is even voice bots. So we have bots currently, but even adding voice to that and be able just to fully automate those day-to-day transactions. So that way the valuable staff members at any given department can spend their time doing other activities. And then obviously automating in other senses as well, using natural language processing and other things. So those are kind of a few different applications that I've been talking about day to day with some higher ed organizations, but I just have more other applications that I think are coming to the forefront as well.
Thanks, Lindsay. We've been spending some time flip-flopping from all the exciting opportunities to the challenges, and as John pointed out, a lot of times they're one and the same. But there is a dark side to how AI is being not only perceived, but some of the data coming out in research studies about AI and its impact on global society in general, especially its role in the future workforce. Certainly, there's no shortage of articles lamenting that AI is a real major threat to job security. And it could potentially be, Debra pointed out an example in China where AI did replace teachers with some interesting success. And I'd love to read that article. I know I'm going to be one of the people clamoring to read that after this call. But I'd love to ask both of you, Mariano and John. And Mariano, we'll start with you. Is AI really a threat to job security and education? What's your take?
Personally, I don't think so. I think, and I'm echoing many other voices in saying that I see AI as liberating in many respects. So I don't know, I just learned about this study in China, but I would imagine, I almost bet that AI can replace certain aspects of teaching, liberating the instructor, the teacher, to go much deeper into the educational journey. So call me an optimist, but I think that AI, if well implemented, and certainly not in the very near future, might be something that, and again, I'm not the first to use this terminology, but augments human intelligence and allows us human teachers to go much deeper into knowledge with our students. So I don't think it's going to be a threat to job security. It may simply facilitate some of the more low stake and repetitive motions that we go through as instructors at all levels of education.
Thank you so much, Mariano. John, other perspectives on AI and its impact on jobs? John, you are on mute.
I thought I would learn by now, but I guess not. But I think that a lot of the context work AI can take care of. And being in IT for such a long time, you hear about, well, the cloud's going to take away the need for operators. But I think what happens is it gives folks the opportunity to climb the value chain of if there's a unique opportunity now where with AI I can do more and exciting things and more impactful things than I have historically. And I think what AI does is takes away a lot of that context work and gives them that opportunity.
Thank you so much. And just getting us back to where we're all coming from, which is the education realm. Nancy, how do you think educators, learners, professional staff, and others in the education ecosystem can best get started with AI, especially if they don't know where to begin?
Well, we're probably using it in a lot of places. We don't even know we're using it. But from a learning perspective, if you want to learn about AI, there's lots of resources out there. Certainly Google is a good place to start. I think EDUCAUSE has 7 things about AI. Personally, from my perspective, I can speak having developed some resources myself. So when I was at Columbia, my team developed 2 series that are on edX, Data Science for Executives, and also a MicroMasters in Artificial Intelligence, which I think may be the most populated series on edX. I think we had 100,000 students in the first iteration of the artificial intelligence course in that series. And then, there's Coursera is a great resource. There's AI for Everyone is on Coursera, so I've been in that course. There's tons of resources out there, and there's a lot of free resources to get started building. So you can know at an administrator level, you can know at a programmer level, you can know as a parent, as an educator. I think we have to be aware of all of the uses of AI in this space. Going back to like what you were saying about, like, there was just a controversy I put in the chat about facial recognition at the airport. So they're deploying this technology thinking that people are going to value the expediency of getting through lines faster without any consideration that people might be offended or concerned about their privacy. And I think that those are risks we can run by deploying systems without thinking about the ramifications, the long-term and short-term ramifications of these types of systems, because they can be very invasive.
Thank you, Nancy, for that. Any other panelists have thoughts on how those of us in the audience that maybe haven't gotten started on anything AI related whatsoever can get started and kind of dig their heels in, or at least dip their toes in the waters?
So Sam, I think that with cloud services right now, I think that the entry into doing any type of AI related work is relatively easy, whether that's creating a voice skill that learns as it goes along. I've seen 10-year-olds build skills within, say, 10, 15 minutes, and that result is pretty amazing for them to see this voice in front of them talking, and then also learning the different ways to ask questions out there. And also just when I think about chatbots, the ability to create a chatbot, take a corpus of knowledge or say some frequently asked questions, put it into chatbot technology and have something return, within minutes, or even doing some type of a facial recognition software that's out there. I think that that's part of the challenge, is how do I build up the confidence of using the tools out there? And then it really goes back to the point I mentioned earlier. It's like, let's not focus really on the technology. Let's focus on the student learning, student outcomes. And that should really be what driving us all the time. It might or might not be AI that is the way that answers those questions, or that possibility. It might just be human interaction might be the best way to do it. But clearly, if we want to scale, AI is one way that's going to help us do that.
Thank you for sharing that, John. I want to stick with you for a second, because I think you're bringing up something important that, like you said, has nothing to do with the technology, and that's culture and the environment. I know you brought up some good points. Are there other environmental conditions for successful deployment or infusion of AI, do you think? Or maybe that aren't important now, but we'll need to be thinking about years down the road?
What's interesting, a couple different, I think we're lucky here at ASU, we have this culture of innovation. So I think in terms of especially the central IT staff and also just faculty and staff around campus, they have this, I think they have a little bit of a freedom to do more and think bigger. But also, like, looking at the students, and we're finding out that a high percentage of our students in our mobile app actually opt in for us to capture information about them, and they realize by them providing all this information, they're going to be expecting probably better service out there. And even though I have a small sample of 2 daughters that were in college recently, in this new world, they expect great service, but they also realize they have to give something up a little bit in that process. So I think that's one thing that we've learned as well.
I actually think that's a really, really important point. And I think someone earlier said data is oil, and I've heard data is currency. And how much do you have to expose of yourself for the AI to be is maximally helpful and productive? It's sort of a give and take, and that's actually a really interesting question. Love to see that in the survey. Wow, thank you. My mind's going all sorts of interesting places now. And we're actually at the point, we have about 15 minutes left where we could start taking some questions from the audience. And one such question that has come up, and I think this could be filed under things to help make AI more concrete in the education sector. This one's coming to us from Brian Alexander. He's asking of the panel, what tools can students use today to get under the hood of AI without coding? Any panelists, any ideas or recommendations? I'll also ask the same question of the audience. I know many of us are here because we are AI enthusiasts. Other tools, resources?
I think to build, you probably have to code to some degree. I don't know that there are any, there are some, graphical interfaces, but I think, so part of it is, and I always think about this because I've worked in both types of environments. At some institutions, you're going to have really rich resources to build your own, and at other places you're not. So you're going to be working with vendors in this space. And I think, understanding the capabilities and, so sometimes you will be able to build in all the tool, like the Alexa toolkit is freely available and it's not that hard to use. So, it's easy to kind of just jump in. And I think the best way to learn is by doing. So just build something. But for some of us, it's going to be build by, so we have to know how to work with vendors and things like that. So I think there are lots of different, like I said, perspectives that we come at this from.
Yeah, and I'm Mariano, you had your hand up. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, I wanted to super quickly share an experience that we had here at CSUN for 2 consecutive years now. We call it the AI Jam, and what it is we invite students to come up with their own ideas to solve problems through AI. And in a nutshell, the way that works is students normally tend to self-assemble in teams where there will be someone with no coding experience whatsoever and some people with some coding experience and programming experience. And I think, as Debra was pointing out, we live at a time, no matter how flashy some of the news about AI can get, the reality of it is that we still live in a time in which you still need a know-how on how to deal with computers and programming that is probably much deeper than most people can anticipate. So, and going back to something that John was saying before, I think that it's despite of that, it's a very exciting time for students because really this is the time where we can, we don't have to put the cart in front of the horse. And it's mostly about asking the question, what we can do for AI rather than AI for us, AI can do for us, because it's really a time in which it's mostly about what we can imagine that what AI can deliver in many ways. So I would like to turn that question around. What kinds of AI tools can our students use today? I would turn it completely upside down and say, well, let's get our students thinking about what kind of AI tools they envision that would help them out in their journey.
This is such a perfect segue for John because at ASU, I know there's been an initiative taking place to get students involved in just that with Alexa. John, could you say more about that work?
I can, and by the way, I'm loving watching the chat out there. There's a lot of great, whether it's talking about Google Dialogflow or Alexa and some of the fear out there, it's just great conversation to have, and I think it's a healthy conversation to have. But what we did is we had a hackathon last year around voice technology, and so there was a pretty nice prize of $5,000 scholarship as well as a trip to Amazon. And well, first of all, I expected the students to come prepared to write all this, write the code and learn Python. And everyone came there with no fear. And that was the first part of it. They just thought they could learn over the weekend, and which a lot of them did. But what was interesting about it is that two of the winning teams didn't use very sophisticated tools. They used more program-free tools to build out their voice applications. And while me being a technologist expected the winning skills to be those that were using the Canvas API or were doing crazy, technology things with sensors, the winners were very simple around anxiety. How do I deal with anxiety of a student and building out a voice skill that does that, or using the voice technology to a very simple recycling skill out there. And so I think that the barrier to do this type of coding is very low. And the great thing about our students is that there's no fear out there. They're not scared of this technology at all, and whatever it takes to do this. And it was exciting to see the students who won really weren't, these were freshmen. Also, it was great. There was a huge female population who won, and that was sort of this moment of even a learning moment for me, that it's really not about the technology. It's about the delivery of the product, and it was just really a fun time. And I think by us doing that, it's lowering this fear of technology, as well as we're also trying to introduce it into several of our classes as well. So as part of programming classes, not only do I learn about Python in some of these introductory classes and C++, I'm also introducing a little bit of Alexa coding out there, and knowing that voice is going to be one of those next technology disruptors, and we should pay attention to that.
Yeah, well said. And I love how this conversation has gone full circle back to the gender gap a bit, and very exciting to hear of the student involvement, of course. We started talking about that as well. What's interesting to me is, as technologies become more sophisticated and mainstream, people find ways to democratize them. So, of course, I'm thinking about something like graphic design. And now you don't have to necessarily be a graphic designer to create something like an infographic. There's tons of free online tools that allow you, with a simple clicks, to create something really polished looking. The same way that social media, in many ways, has democratized authoring. Boom, you could publish an article just like that on LinkedIn and share your thoughts that way. So I'm definitely going to be keeping my ear to the ground and really watching to see what solutions people come up with to make AI and the design of AI more accessible to the masses. So certainly something to think about.
And Sam, you bring up a good point. Now you can create, painting masterpieces with AI. They're smart enough to do that. So endless possibilities out there.
There you go. And I remember reading about Zappagee. I think that was created out of one of the Florida universities years ago, an AI-based program that could deliver fiction to you if you gave them just a minimal amount of information about plot and characters. So what does that say about 22nd century authorship, right? We joke about 15th century authors like Shakespeare. Do they exist, or did they not exist? Those are going to be the types of questions we're also asking ourselves, but on a different level in the coming centuries. It's a very exciting time. Lindsay, I want to kick it over to you, because Mariano and John both raised some exciting examples of how AI is or currently being leveraged in ways that impact students. Any other examples or that you can think of, especially with regards to how AI is being perceived and used at salesforce.org?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, again, any scenario where you can come up with a way to navigate information more effectively, or again, to predict any sort of outcome. So there's not even just predicting success, but there's even like maximizing maybe earning potential, right? If you're more vocational focused institution. Or even to understanding, like, is the student a right fit for the university, right? Using, again, that big data and the application on the recruiting side of the process. So there's a lot of really great opportunity. Again, it is kind of a new horizon. So it's a lot of it like these earlier level conversations, but we're really excited to see how this can continue to grow. And then also to kind of call back to the earlier question, we also have a learning platform called Trailhead. We also have a specific curriculum-focused one too called Trailhead for Students that's designed for college students. And we're still continuing to build out content related to AI in Einstein and the Salesforce platform. And trailhead.com is free as well. And most of it is no code. There is some low code as well. But that's another thing to add to your list. Of course, it is more specific to the Salesforce aspects of that, but it's definitely, I think, one to look into. And I do know too that even some higher ed institutions have students internally working on some of their own AI projects at the university level, being supervised by faculty and leveraging some of the pieces of our platform. So it's another really exciting, I think, use for students to get their hands on AI as students.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll just jump in really quickly. In the series that we built on edX, there is a coding platform built. It's the actual series, the same courses that run at Columbia. So there's an AI series, there's a machine learning series, and they have coding assignments in them. And so I think you can actually do work in the MOOC series. So don't think that you can't actually code. They have coding platforms built in, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, fantastic. So we have 5 minutes left in the program, and so I want to give the panelists just a chance to give their wrap-up thoughts, their concluding thoughts. Feel free to ask yourself a question and answer it that hasn't been asked yet, of course, but any closing thoughts kind of after this conversation has taken place? And then, fair warning, Karina, we're coming to you on your take. So Nancy, let's keep it on you. Closing thoughts.
So we didn't talk about like robotics or robotic process automation, which is a whole nother area that I'm super interested in. I did put some stuff in the chat about that. So it's not the robots that are going to take the jobs away. It's automating processes that are going to change how we do work. So I think that's a whole nother area that is super interesting to me.
Oh, absolutely. What about you, Deborah?
Well, I think the thing that I'm struck with the most is the magnitude that this change is going to bring into our lives at large and education specifically. It is something I think not only do we have to develop ways for our students to get acquainted with it, but we as educators, regardless of our roles, we need to jump on the bandwagon and educate ourselves in order to remain effective and relevant educators in the next 5 years. I know in my field as an instructional designer, learning engineering is becoming the new term for my role. And it involves coding, it involves data and analytics and all of these pieces. So I think it's a time of preparation, not only for students, but for ourselves as well.
Thank you, Deborah. That just reminds me how quickly our definitions and concepts of digital fluency are expanding. And I'm just thinking of, being an English major back in the day, how AI design would be embedded in such a discipline, an area of study moving forward, and what the implications would be. So super fascinating. John, closing thoughts from you.
So my random thought is that, first of all, the human mind is an amazing thing. And when we think about technology and these new brains being created, my biggest fear is that computers are going to need the ability to forget, or they're going to become neurotic. And so I think that's my final comment of the day. So how do we get rid of all that noise in your brain? We can do it. The human mind can, but can these new AI computers do that?
Oh, wow. That is blowing my mind. Thank you, John. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Mariano, over to you. Final words.
I think that maybe this is a follow-up on John's point, but for all this talk about the fear of machines replacing humans and becoming better than humans, I think that currently, at least, what we should be much more fearful about is machines just getting it wrong. And as a teacher, what keeps me awake at night is the fear of maybe coming out with a chatbot that just delivers the wrong information. So since all of these AI technology in many ways has advanced so much, but in so many other ways it's in its infancy, just keep an eye out there for whatever mistakes we can make along the way.
Well said. Thank you, Mariano. Very important point. Lindsay, the final word.
Oh gosh, so much pressure now. Yeah, I guess, to sum it up, I would say it's definitely, this is an exciting time, right? And there's a big change coming. I think we need to take steps and take efforts and go forward, knowing that we have to be very careful. There's a lot at stake. But I would encourage everyone to figure out how can you take even a small step today, maybe go forward a little bit and explore some AI, maybe in a sense you haven't yet before. So that would be my take. It's take some steps. Starts with a step.
And then share your experience in the Slack community.
Yes.
Don't forget.
Yes, really great. Shameless plug. I love it. Thank you, Nancy. The AI Slack channel. And then final word. The woman behind the art, of course, Karina Branson, who's made this. Can we just give her a round of applause?
Yes, amazing.
Don't let the mute fool you, Karina. We're all clapping. What's your take kind of in stitching this all together in this art? Okay, we cannot hear you. Oh, there you go. Oh, you are on mute.
Am I unmuted?
You're good.
Okay. So this was just so much fun. My mind is blown. I think what really has stuck with me is the human aspect of AI, and I think a lot of times we forget that. So that we as humans have the potential to really shape where this goes and do really good things with this. And yes, there are challenges left and right and center, but there's a lot of really good hearts and minds behind this. So the potential for automating education in ways that would free up teachers to be more creative and spend more time with their students just is a really cool idea. And that there's potential for more personalized learning and allowing, I love this theme. I feel like every single time we think, hey, let's bring the students into this conversation because they're thinking of things totally different and way beyond. They're, like 4 steps ahead of us. So that question of what can our students envision for AI, and they're just taking things even beyond what we would think. So thanks for the opportunity to listen in.
And thank you so much, Karina, for the beautiful art, which will be posted to our website, of course, post-event. So thank you so much to our amazing panelists, our wonderful audience for this vibrant conversation. We hope to see you all June 27th for our next episode of Shaping EDU Live, focused on embedding data-driven approaches for student success. So definitely very much related to this meeting in lots of ways. Learn more and register at shapingedu.asu.edu. And finally, please save the date. The 2020 Shaping EDU Unconference is taking place March 11th through 13th in Tempe, Arizona. So thank you all again for tuning in today. Until next time, keep dreaming, doing, and driving. Bye, everyone. Thank you.